Freedom is something that we hear about nearly every day, but what does it really mean? Some people have given up their lives to protect the freedom of others, while others have actually killed to suppress it. And specifically looking at freedom of speech, is it something that we should encourage or treat with caution? Join me for real stories, real issues and real views. This is Real Talk. Assalamu alaikum and welcome to another edition of Real Talk. On today's show, we're going to be looking at freedom of speech, both the advantages and the dangers of it. Now, it's a topic which increasingly more and more people are talking about, and communities are facing, trying to balance out the pros and cons. We'll be having a look at both sides of the story today, and to help me do that, I've got an expert panel with me in the studio. Ravil, Saab, if I could start with you. Ravil Bukharaev, Saab, welcome to Real Talk. He's a writer and former BBC radio journalist. Assalamu alaikum, it's good to have you on the show today. Next, I'm joined by Qudsi Rasheed. Assalamu alaikum, welcome to Real Talk. Qudsi is a human rights lawyer and formerly a lecturer on free speech. And finally, we have Waqar Ahmedi Saab. Assalamu alaikum, welcome to Real Talk. Waqar Saab's been on the show before, and he's a religious affairs writer. So to my panel, assalamu alaikum, welcome to the show. Also, we're joined by a small studio audience here as well. Ravil Saab, if I could turn to you first. We're discussing freedom of speech today, but where did it actually evolve from? Where did the whole notion of freedom of speech come from?
Well, you see, it's a quite an important question, actually, whether freedom of speech was a God-given right to a man or not, or it's something which was invented by a liberal society. I think that in the importance of the freedom of speech, as we discussed before here, is the main importance is not that it's a human right per se, or that it's a part of the liberal society, democratic society per se, but without the freedom of speech, you can never attain to truth.
Right, okay.
And this is the most important thing here. The truth is about free speech and free speech about truth. What else, secondary things come here. But now I remember being at the BBC once. I went to make a report on this demonstration at Trafalgar Square about the Danish caricatures on the Holy Prophet. And I was making this small report, and I was asking people what they think. They were very intelligent British men, and I asked him what he thinks. He said, I have perfect right to insult their religion, speaking of Islam. This I remember for 5 or 6 years now, that he has a perfect right to insult my religion. And this is how he thinks about it. He was nice otherwise, a very, very nice man and very intelligent man. And I was thinking whether it is really his right. And thinking of it, indeed, there is nothing in the constitutional laws of this land to preclude him from doing so, except for a moral code, but then the moral code is different for different societies and different men. This is first thing, just to, warm up the discussion. And secondly, you remember, I was born in the Soviet Union, in a country where free speech was kind of at a very short supply in those days. And in the 1990 or a little bit later, I went to Barbados first. And then I met this American man who was teaching me about free speech and about all things democratic. And I was a bit tired of it because he was really doing it, with all his zeal and so forth. And I said, well, okay, I understand what you're talking about, free speech. But then again, in my opinion, free speech is something is defined, but what you are prepared to pay for it. And with what? For example, I told him, well, okay, of course I can go, and say that the American president is not what I like about him. It's all right. But I say, why don't you go to your manager, line manager, and with all your might of your free speech, just tell him what you think about him.
And see what the reaction
And see what the reaction will be. And he understood, and he stopped teaching me because he understood for the first time that it's not the free speech is the key, but what I are prepared to pay, what you're set to sacrifice for it. And this is also a very, very important question. Because when you're abusing free speech, meaning that you're abusing this, which is behind that.
We'll touch on that later on in the program.
I mean, if you look at the past and the way that these things used to happen, the mentality of countries was, or states or situations was, you do what you're told, and that's it. I'm in power, I'm telling you this is the way it is, and this is the way it is. There's no opportunity for debate or discussion. So when you think about free expression, there's essentially two elements to it that come out from the past. There's the right for you to say what you want to say, but there's also the right for you to listen to what other people say. And that's precisely the point I think Ravil Sahib is making, is that everyone has a claim to truth. I say I'm right, you say you're right. The only way that you're going to know and be able to decide who's right is if you allow people to say what they want to say, and you use your own moral judgment to choose which one of those ones you want to do.
Picking up on the terminology used, I hear about freedom of speech, freedom of expression, freedom of thought. Are they all, linked, or what are the sort of subtle differences between those?
They're definitely linked. I mean, freedom of thought is slightly different because freedom of thought is an internal concept. You can't change how my brain is wired up and what I'm doing. You can influence it, you can't change it. So it's much more protected, what's called freedom of thought or conscience. Free expression and free speech are generally used interchangeably. Free speech technically is slightly more narrow. It's what I'm doing now. It's the spoken word. Free expression tends to cover any form of expression, so speech or art or drama or any form of behaviour. I choose to wear red rather than yellow.
And you're expressing yourself through that.
Precisely.
Okay, I understand. Waqar Sahib, just turning to you, why is it important to have free speech, just generally? Why are some people prepared to, give up so much just to actually get that free speech in society?
Put simply, I think, is so that society can progress, and at the same time for human beings to also develop as human beings. I think the importance of the freedom of expression is something that's recognized internationally, and to the extent that even in the United Nations Charter of Human Rights, there are a couple of articles where it's clearly stated that it is a valuable human right, it's a sacred human right, and so does the European Convention of Human Rights say exactly the same. So it's valuable in the context of it allowing human beings to converse with each other, for information to be disseminated, for knowledge to spread, and this is where obviously the media has a very important part to play as well.
All right, let's just open it up to the audience. Looking at freedom of speech in a very general view, what's your understanding of freedom of speech and how important do you think it is? Qudsi Rasheed, would you like to add something?
I certainly think that freedom of speech or freedom of expression, as it is said, is certainly a privilege. It's a privilege in this society, in open society, in democratic society, in the West. But as all privileges, the society must understand that every privilege comes with a responsibility. For example, authority comes with a responsibility that will not be abused. Majority comes with a responsibility that will not be used to impose an undue will on the minority. And a freedom of expression comes with the responsibility that will not be used to malign others or for hate speech. So in a sense, that is where the society goes wrong. For everything else, they say, yeah, there's a responsibility. But when it comes to freedom of speech, then everything goes. They say you can say anything you want to anyone and at any time.
Yeah. Okay. Let's get one more point.
You see, one of the difficulties that I have with this whole concept is that how do you define it at any given time? And as has been mentioned by the panel, in different countries, they define it at different times according to how a very small group will create the definitions. We can look at it in a bigger way as well, that we're living in the 21st century. Even humanity as a whole today might define the limits of freedom of speech, whereas 200 years ago, people living at that time may have felt, or even further back in the past, going even to ancient times, humanity at that time may have also defined their limits, which would be quite different to now. But at that time, they may have felt that they were a progressive society, and they may have evidence to show for that. Whereas today, we are changing the borders as we see fit. And does the panel have any comment on whether there is a kind of universal way of defining this that is separate, that can be separated from any given group or any given time or
How would the
nation?
panel respond to that? Qudsi, have you got?
Yeah, I mean, just picking up on that point, it's one of the most difficult questions in philosophy is, are things fixed in time and space, or is everything relative and subjective?